Welcome to Beyond the Lab, a series by the Office of Career Development within the Biomedical Research, Education, and Training Department of the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. My name is Kate Stewart. I'm here today with Paul Ruest. Welcome. And you were a CDB, Cell and Developmental Biology graduate?
I was. I graduated in 2001.
Okay, so what did you do at Vanderbilt?
I was in Steve Hank's lab, and I was looking at mechanisms of cell migration and signaling through a protein called crack-associated substrate, or Cas, and the mechanism by which it was phosphorylated and mediated cell migration by being phosphorylated and regulated by focal adhesion kinase and Src family kinases.
Okay, so what do you do now? Well, what did you do after Vanderbilt first?
So after Vanderbilt, I did a postdoc at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and I was there for about a year and a half before I realized that I would like to try something maybe a little bit different beyond the lab.
Okay.
So I was fortunate enough that my wife, Tara Ruest, Tara Gower at the time, she wanted to pursue experiences or career outside of the lab, basically right after graduate school. So she found something in the pharmaceutical industry, in medical education, medical communications. And when she kind of described what she was doing, she had moved down to New Jersey a little bit before me into Pharmaland. And when she described what she was doing, basically kind of telling a story, taking clinical data and translating it into a story, whether it's into manuscripts or slide decks, medical education slide decks, things like that, and really kind of crafting a story. That was something that I was really interested in, because that's what I liked to do when I was in graduate school.
Yeah.
With the papers that I wrote with my mentor. I was telling a story about the data and the research that I had done. So that really appealed to me. So I actually applied, or looked up medical education, medical communications companies online, and found a few, and just kind of made some calls. And fortunately, I got some interviews pretty quickly. Flew down to New Jersey for a couple of interviews, got lucky, and went into medical education and communications, and worked in that for about 10 years.
Yeah.
I worked for 2 or 3 different companies, and then I actually moved into pharma proper, and worked for a company called Celgene. I worked for them for about 2 years or so in their SciComms division, which is kind of the other side of the coin from medical education communications agencies. They often work with pharma. So I was on that client side, and I really enjoyed that. But then we had kids, we had twins, and I was looking for something a little bit more flexible. And I had done a little bit of freelance medical writing in the past. So Tara and I decided that maybe I should give that a shot. So I did, and I've been doing that for the past 5 years now, 5.5 years. Medical writing and medical communications freelance.
Right. So what does a typical day look like for you? I mean, I'm sure it's different.
It is. It's very different. I can say one thing that I don't do on a day-to-day basis is attend meetings. When I was in pharma proper and working in medical communications agencies, just meeting after meeting, lots of meetings. And I don't have that anymore. Also, there's a lot less travel, too. In pharma, there's quite a bit of travel that I was having to do. So, those 2 things really kind of free up a lot more time, allow me to focus on content and developing medical content.
Okay.
So there's no real typical day, I would say. I do have a short commute. I just go upstairs after I get the kids off to school. So it's, there's no real typical day.
So what are some of the things that you might do on a daily basis that that you sort of either have certain deadlines or certain calendars or seasons that you work on different projects? Like what's that like for you?
A lot of times around major congresses, like ASCO is going on right now, starting I think tomorrow or something like that. Around ASCO, usually a couple months before ASCO, start developing abstracts, posters, and things like that.
Okay.
So the heavy seasons, I guess, are right before congresses. There's ASCO and ASH, both oncology based. as well as a couple others that I'm usually involved with, like American Diabetes Association, the ADA annual meeting. So those are kind of the heavy seasons. Towards the end of the summer, it starts to get a little bit slower, and then picks up again towards the fall.
Okay. So in a freelance role, how do you're sort of your own boss, how do you get some of your projects and your work?
Well, I made a lot of contacts when I was working for an agency or for a couple of different agencies. And I maintain those contacts and, through various venues like LinkedIn and things like that. And I, also rely on word of mouth. So if I'm working for one of my clients, they often have colleagues, friends throughout the industry that might be looking for medical writing help, and they'll refer me to their friends. So I rely a lot on referrals.
Okay, great. So how is this a good fit for you personally with your skill set?
Well, as I mentioned, we have the twins. So flexibility is key.
Okay.
It definitely allows me to spend more time with the kids. I have to say, when we first had the kids, I was still working. I was working in pharma and traveling quite a bit, and I realized that it would be difficult to spend a lot of time with the kids, which to me is a priority, and still maintain my job. So, like I said, freelancing, I knew it would allow me to be a little bit more, or a lot more flexible. So I wanted to pursue that full time, and it's worked out really well.
Okay.
So it's a perfect fit for me.
Good. What are some of the things that, if a current graduate student or postdoc wanted to go into freelance medical writing, which we do have quite a bit, what were some bits of advice you would give them as they try to pursue that career?
I would say if they wanted to go into freelance medical writing, it's probably key to start out working with an agency first, for a medical communications company first. Okay. First, because you build up a lot of experience. You'll work on various things from manuscripts to slide decks to strategic communication platforms to whatever. Second, you'll gain broad therapeutic knowledge. I mean, you kind of do what projects come in the door.
Sure.
Whether it's oncology or diabetes. I recently worked on a multiple sclerosis scientific platform, which I have no experience with MS.
Sure.
So it's great. It's a neat career because you get to learn a lot about a lot of different things. Whereas when I was working in the pharma industry proper, I was on a particular drug, and that was my therapeutic area, and I had to stick with it. Not to say that you can't move around, of course you can, but from one week to the next, I might be on two totally different therapeutic areas, working on very different projects. So it's very diverse, and I like that I can learn a lot of different things pretty quickly.
Sure. So what would you tell grad students and postdocs? Probably work with the agency.
I would say work with an agency first. And there's also, through the American Medical Writers Association, AMWA, they have a certificate program. I think the University of Chicago also has an online program. There are various universities that have medical writing certifications or certificates. So I would recommend, possibly, I didn't do that. I just kind of learned by doing it, working. I would say if you want to go directly into freelance and you really don't want to go work for an agency first, then maybe think about getting a certificate, just to give you some kind of credentials for medical writing.
Sure.
But if you want to go freelance and you don't want to, get a certificate or a certification, then you probably should try and spend at least a couple years working for an agency, a medcom agency.
Okay, that's great. What are some of the more exciting things that you're glad to get to work on that you might not have been able to do in an agency setting because you're freelance?
There's a lot of exciting things. One of the things that I'm working on now, currently I've been working on for the past year or so, are strategic communications platforms. So I'm working with an agency, and their client is a pharmaceutical company. And say, for example, they have a new drug, and they're seeking a new indication for it. And they need a scientific platform. Basically, what that is to put that drug in perspective as to where it fits in as an unmet need in the therapeutic area. What unmet need can this drug fill? what's the mechanism of action of this drug, what are some of the key clinical data for this drug, and importantly, what this drug might mean to patients, payers, and providers. So those are kind of the 4 chapters in a strategic communications platform. And then what my job is to kind of research each one of those areas and fill in those pillars to tell a story. Again, it's getting back to telling a story, which I really like to do. So it's telling a story about the drug. What's the need? What's the clinical data, and what it means to patients, payers, and providers. So then, like I said, it's really kind of telling that story from beginning to end, where this drug fits in and how it's important.
Okay, awesome. So what words of wisdom would you give current grad students and postdocs as they sort of jump into the career search, or maybe something you might have done differently that you wish that they would know?
What would I have done differently? I'm not sure I would have done anything differently. One thing I think that's great that the Brett Office of Career Development is doing is exposing students and postdocs to what we used to call alternative careers. They're not alternative careers, they're just careers in science. So that I think that's really important. And because when I was in graduate school, I think we had Career Development Day towards the end. It was starting to be developed towards the end of my graduate career. So I wish I would have known a little bit more about the pharmaceutical industry. I had no idea the difference between phase 1 and phase 2 study. Now it's just it's what I do every day. So I didn't really know a lot about the pharmaceutical industry. I had to kind of pick that up on my own just through experience.
Sure.
And so I wish I would have known that.
Good. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kate.